If you've been taught that the Sabbath was just for the Jews or that it was an unnecessary burden, this series may surprise you. What is the Sabbath, and why did God command it? We'll be answering this question and more in a few moments. What's up, you cultured kings? Welcome to King's Cultural, where we explore culture from a biblical perspective. My name's Ed, and I'm joined by my friend Lance. Say hi, Lance.
Hey, everybody.
Thanks for joining us for the first episode of the Sabbath series. In this series, we're going to be exploring how the Sabbath was designed by God, clarified by Jesus, and how the fourth commandment applies to God's people today. Lance, when you first became a Christian, what did you think the Sabbath was?
Yeah, when I first became a Christian, it was one of those things that they taught us was part of the Ten Commandments, and I think it wasn't really taught on too much past that, other than that Jesus is our Sabbath rest. And so the idea of Sabbath is something that really wasn't well developed when I was a young Christian.
Hmm. Yeah, I grew up. It was kind of in proximity, like I knew it was a commandment,
hmm
but we really essentially treated it as like a day, maybe not to do chores, but and go to church. Really, all I thought of it was go to church.
Well, I mean, I wasn't raised in a Christian home, so I wish I had even that concept of a Sabbath,
Yeah.
because I was working on Sundays too.
Yeah, but the funny thing was, like, we'd say rest, but then we're making other people work half the time, you know? We go to a restaurant after church, whatnot. So we're gonna be talking about this. We're gonna be exploring these ideas all throughout this series on what the Sabbath is for and not for, what the burdens, what if it's a burden, and yeah, what to do, how to rest. Um, and in this episode, we want to lay a foundation for what the Sabbath is. And so to do that, we have to go back, all the way back. Lance, we're going to be in Genesis chapter 2. Do you want to read?
Yeah, absolutely. So Genesis 2, 2 through 3 says, "And on the seventh day, God finished his work that he had done, and he rested on the seventh day from all of his work that he had done. So God blessed the seventh day and made it holy, because on it God rested from all of his work that he had done in creation."
We see the word rested here a few times.
Yeah.
And that Hebrew word is shavat. That's how it's pronounced in Strong's lexicon. Shavat. And it's where we get the word Sabbath or Shabbat from. That's where the word Sabbath comes. It comes from the word rest. And something interesting here, right? We see that God created the whole world in 6 days, and the seventh day he rested. We see this interesting rhythm in creation. I remember Vodi Balcom teaching this, and it's not a new concept. It goes all the way back that we can observe every other time in the natural, physical sense. The day is based on the sun rising and setting. A month is generally based on the lunar phase. It used to be anyway. A year is based on our orbit around the sun. But a week can't be observed in nature. It's passed down in the creation narrative. So every other time we can receive naturally, but only the week and the Sabbath is given supernaturally in creation. God's rest is baked into creation as a patterned gift.
Hmm. That's interesting.
Yeah. And so we have the Sabbath in creation. And the next time we really see it talked about is in Exodus 16. We get through the whole book of Genesis. It's not really hit on that much, as far as I could tell. But in Exodus 16, after the first Passover, about a month after the first Passover in Exodus, we see God tell Moses that he will rain bread from heaven, and it's called manna. And they will collect it in a pot that day, right? They'll go outside, they'll find the manna on the ground, and they will collect it and they will eat it throughout that day. But they were told not to collect enough for the next day. Lance, do you remember in that story? What happens if they collected too much and kept it overnight?
It would spoil on them.
It would spoil, right? What
Yeah.
else would we get?
Worms. A lot of worms. hmm
Ugh. You ever bitten into like an apple with a worm?
That I can't say that I have, but I've heard stories, and it terrifies people for years to come.
It's so
I I think my,
stinking
my
gross.
wife has eaten like a salad with like a grub that was still in it after it was processed, and
No.
she can't do store bought salads anymore.
I This is not a joke. Last night I wear a CPAP machine. I have sleep apnea, and I put it on, and there was an earwig in it,
Oh, ooh,
and it crawled on my nose.
oh, that's nasty. Yeah,
Kimberly, my wife was already asleep, and I was quietly spazzing out.
Yeah, I would imagine that that's kind of the same sentiment that they'd feel the day after collecting double manna,
Yeah, you reach your hand into your bag of bread and all of a sudden, all
picking up
these
a ton of
maggots on
worms.
there.
Yeah,
Oh, and so then, of course, what does Israel do? They collect more than they need and they get maggots. And so they're like, okay, we learned our lesson. And then they get to the sixth day, right? So they get this manna for 6 days. And on the sixth day, God says, take enough for 2 days. And of course, some of them did, and some of them didn't. And he said, stay in your homes on that seventh day. So collect enough on the sixth day, so the seventh day you don't got to go out. And of course, what do people do on the seventh day?
they went out to go collect manna.
Why not to go grab the stinking manna?
They weren't very
And
good
if
at listening. I feel like that's a trend throughout the Old Testament.
it's like my toddlers.
100%.
And then, but like, hey, am I any better? And so, of course, they go outside and they try and collect manna, but there's none there. And we see that the purpose for this whole manna excursion, that the purpose is listed in Exodus 16:4. The purpose of the Sabbath rest here was to test God's people, whether or not they would walk in his law or not. And so we see the Sabbath so far, it's given in creation as a pattern to rest and as a test of if you will walk in God's law and trust him. Lance, these two instances that talk about the Sabbath, there's something interesting about them that I think a lot of people might miss. So, Lance, what's interesting about these two instances here?
I think that these are the two instances before Mount Sinai, so even before the law is given. And when you're talking about he gave them this in order to see if they would walk in his law, it's interesting that that hasn't come yet.
Yeah, this is kind of the beginning of it. And so we finally, right? You mentioned Sinai. We finally get to the 10 Commandments in Exodus 20. And we see some regulations put on the Sabbath. We see them told a few things. But the very first thing that we're told about the Sabbath is to remember it, to remember the Sabbath. Now, I want us to remember the Sabbath. We want to remember this word because we're not going to cover it today, but we're going to cover it in the future episodes. What this interesting thought of remembering the Sabbath is. And then the next kind of regulation we get is you shall not work or let your children work or your servants or even your livestock work. It was a promise to all creation. It's even to the animals. You shall not work this day of the week. God gives the reason for this in verse 11. He says, for in 6 days the Lord made the heavens and the earth and the sea and all that is in them and rested on the seventh day. So we rest because God rested. And he set apart that day as holy. So we should remember to keep it holy. Any thoughts on that, brother?
I love it. Like I said, I wish that my parents read this, and I wish that I was raised in a Christian home because it would have been nice to have a few days of rest. Um, I'm also thankful that we're not picking up manna.
Me too. So far, I'm going to recap, but I'm going to do this after every verse we do, just so we can all stay on track. So far, we see that the Sabbath is given as a creation pattern of rest, as a test, and as a remembrance that God created everything before he rested. So every Sabbath, we can remember that God created everything. So we're going to keep building on this list of what the Sabbath is because as God often progressively reveals who he is to people and his purposes to people, he doesn't just show his whole hand at once. We're going to see with the Sabbath that it keeps progressively getting revealed what it's about. And so in Deuteronomy 5, we see that Moses reiterates the 10 commandments to God's people, but he phrases them a little bit differently here. He doesn't recall creation this time in the command to observe the Sabbath. That doesn't nullify that it's about creation. But this time they remember that they were once slaves in the land of Egypt. And the Lord your God brought you out of Egypt with a mighty hand and outstretched arm. I think that this idea that they were freed from slavery in Egypt, it actually starts the 10 Commandments in Exodus 20. But here we see it at the Sabbath command as well. And we see that they're told to remember that they were once slaves, but now they are free. And isn't that nice? When your whole identity in Egypt in slavery is wrapped up in your productivity and make more bricks, do more of this, do more of that. And you can remember, even as you labor, even as you work for yourself, oftentimes, oh, I'm free and my worth isn't bound up in my productivity,
Mm. Yeah,
what I produced this week. It's a beautiful thing to remember that we are truly free people. And Christians, we have a Passover event as well. I feel like we can't talk about an episode without talking about the Passover. We can't get away
that's
from
true.
it.
That's
But
okay.
when Christ, the Passover Lamb of God, was crucified at the time of Passover, he brought us out from being slaves to sin to being free to serve the Lord our God. So this wasn't just simply a day off of work to be lazy, to chill out. This is proclaiming. The Sabbath is proclaiming, I once was a slave, but now I am free and I am not confined to the world's rhythms anymore. I'm not confined to, I can work every day till I tire myself out and be all these guys that say, like, if you're not hustling, you're not doing it right.
Hmm.
You can rest, you can trust in the Lord. And so far, Sabbath is given as a creation pattern, as a test, as a remembrance that God created everything before he rested, and that we used to be slaves, but now we are free. And we're going to look at another instance of the Sabbath. Lance, will you read this next verse about the Sabbath in Exodus 31?
Sure. Scripture says, "And the Lord said to Moses, You are to speak to the people of Israel and say, Above all, you shall keep my Sabbaths, for this is a sign between me and you throughout your generations, that you may know that I, the Lord, sanctify you. You shall keep the Sabbath, because it is holy for you."
I love that. So we get another good purpose of the Sabbath. Lance, what'd you kind of take away? What is the purpose that we see for the Sabbath here?
Well, I think the main point is that it's a sign between his people and him, and that he takes it very seriously.
Yeah, right? Just off the top of your head, you can look at it and you go, it's a sign, but it's not just a sign of the old covenant. Some people will say, okay, it's an old covenant thing,
Hmm.
but it's a sign that he sanctifies his people,
Hmm.
that God sanctifies his people. And then it again reminds us that this is a sign that God created everything and rested the seventh day. Do you think that's important that we remember that?
I think so. That sounds something that's worth remembering.
We got to remember who's in charge. If we
Yeah.
forget that God created everything, we have it's a wonky, lopsided view of God. And so, again, recapping, the Sabbath is a creation pattern for rest, a test, a remembrance that God created everything, a remembrance that we were once slaves but are now free, and it is a sign that God sanctifies us. And lastly, we're going to see that it's something that God really cares about. We see judgments over Israel for not resting on the Sabbath because it was a sign that they weren't trusting him. And because we're trying to keep these episodes manageable, I'm going to give you a few references to look up on your own, right down here. That's where we put the verses every time. And if you're listening on audio, we put the verses on the bottom every time. It takes longer, but we think it's really important. We've gotten good feedback on
So watch the videos.
it. So watch the videos. Please leave a comment if you like them. But here we go. We see that the Sabbath and the blessings associated with it in Isaiah 58 and Isaiah 66. These are some of my favorite verses about the Sabbath. It gives encouragement for people who don't think they need to be keeping it or shouldn't be keeping it. He goes, hey, no, I'm going to bless you. We see God is pretty dang upset at people for not keeping it in Jeremiah 17. He's passing some harsh judgments. And we see in Nehemiah, the book of Nehemiah, they're rebuilding the wall, and there's some traders that try and come into town because they want to sell some of their goods to Israel. And we see that Nehemiah defended keeping the Sabbath with a sword against merchants. They go, "Hey, you want to bring your stuff here to sell? Not on my watch. Tomorrow." We see that God cares about this day, and He cares that we observe it. Now that we know what the Sabbath is and what it's for, it's probably important as Christians that we ask, how did Jesus treat the Sabbath? And did Jesus break the Sabbath like some people accused him of? That's what we're going to be answering in next week's episode. Lance is going to be spearheading that conversation, and we're going to be going through how did Jesus interact with the Sabbath? And we're going to be doing 6 parts on what is the Sabbath, how Christians should be treating it, and what it's about. Lance, did you have any other thoughts on this before we close out?
I thought that it was a great foundational teaching to what the Sabbath is. And I'm really excited for everyone to kind of come along with us on these video series just to kind of explore the topic even more. So thank you for this first one, Ed.
Thanks, man. And I'm excited next time because next I did all the talking this one. Lance is doing most of the talking the next one. I'm really excited because he's way smarter than me.
I don't know about that.
Oh, yeah, that's the only way that you're not smarter than me is because you don't know that. Anyways, if you like this video, please give it a big like. If you want to keep exploring culture from a biblical perspective, then please hit the subscribe button. It really helps us out more than you can know. It helps us show that you're tracking along with us and that you want to see more of this because we do the animated videos, but these are honestly so much more fun talking to my best friend about the Bible. If you want a free ebook about Jesus and the biblical feast, you can click the link in the description below. If you have any questions, we do a Q&A series. So if you have any questions, you want to be featured in this, ask a question about the Sabbath, ask a question about the Bible, ask a question about what's going on in culture, because we're looking at this stuff too, and we're asking the same questions, or we have asked the same questions. We're going to be answering them here on the channel. If you want to send a question privately, you can DM me at King's Cultural. Check all of my messages. Love to hear from you there. All right, that's all for now. And as always, to God all praise and glory. Thanks for watching.